Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jenny Choat, and I officially became part of the Hart family back in November last when I married Brett's sister Jill. See, I know it already. Brett's sister Jan. I think Brett was pretty okay with that because he asked me to MC this event today, and I'm very, very pleased and honoured to be here for this occasion. And what an occasion it is. We're all here to celebrate the life of an amazing woman. She had a beautiful smile and she was loved by everybody. Even though her physical form has left us, her spirit will live on with us forever. I keep imagining Jill just out there somewhere, having a little laugh, watching over us, maybe giving a little quip, as she was so prone to do, and watching all of our antics. Jan actually said last night she can picture Jill with her best friend Helly up there somewhere floating on a cloud, looking down on us all today, and Helly saying, "Damn Jill, you've got a lot more there than I had." And of course, anyone who knows Helly would know that she would have used far more colourful speech than that. We do have children present. On behalf of the family, I welcome you all here, Jill's very dear friends, and thank those particularly who have travelled here from long distances. I'd also like to acknowledge on behalf of all of you, Jill's beautiful family, her sister Sig and niece Suzanne, brother Rod, and of course husband Brett, beautiful daughter Zoe, and these gorgeous grandchildren Ruby and Max. I just want to take a little moment to tell you how this afternoon celebration will unfold. Firstly, we'll be handing to Rod Robey, Jill's brother, to speak, and then to Brett, and then Zoe, and last but not least, her wonderful friend and former work colleague, David Hill. After David's speech, we'll break, and if you haven't got a drink already, we'll give you a quick chance to grab a drink so that we can have a toast to Jill. After that, relax, mingle as you have been, have some food, watch the PowerPoint presentation, and enjoy your memories of Jill. There'll also be a roving mic because we're hoping that some of you will have an amazing little short story, anecdote, give us all a laugh, and share something about your past experiences with Jill. For now, we're going to start that contribution with her brother, Rod Robey. Thank you, Rod.
Good afternoon. What a great afternoon. I think Jill would have loved this. Your numbers and support for Jill, my sister, is very much appreciated, which is indicative of Jill's popularity and regard, which I am sure would have made her very proud. Being the only boy of the family, of four siblings, I was somewhat left out. I keep on forgetting the age. Being the only boy in our family of four siblings, I was somewhat left out of the secret women's business, which my sisters Sig, Jude and Jill shared, and also conspired against me from time to time. Jill, being the eldest, took the high ground and saw me as a bit of a pain when we were growing up. I can vividly recall our childhood with fondness and frustration with Jill in equal proportions. My father was a strict autocrat who gave orders to be obeyed or else. I didn't blame him when this was applied to the girls, but thought he was unfair when directed at me. Dad was also tight with his money, as our mum did not work, which was the norm for those days, but I thought he was a cheapskate, giving the four of us $2 bob to share to go to the afternoon flicks on a Saturday afternoon, and worse still, gave the money to Jill, being the eldest, to dispense the spoils amongst us. I reckon she dudded me on many occasions as she spun me the yarn that there wasn't enough to go around, which I questioned while serving ice cream on a tune. We often had our differences and she had plenty of names calling. For example, I was called a podgy. And so I retaliated, calling Jill a Luigi. If any of you here today can recall these terminologies, you may not have a long time on this earth. We had a good upbringing in Penrith, although I often reflect on how our lives would have turned out if Dad would have raised us in the eastern suburbs where he grew up in Waverley, where the four of us would often visit our grandparents, which was next door to the Christian Brothers School in Beryl Street, where Dad was dux of the school. I didn't inherit all those brains. Dad and Jill had a close relationship and got her first job at Penrith Police Station, which I guess he thought he could keep an eye on her, being the district magistrate. This move turned out to be fortuitous for me, as Jill was a good sort in a day, which did not go unnoticed by the local constabulary. When I visited the police station to obtain a learner's permit to drive my first car, the young officer looked at my application and with a twinkle in his eye he asked, "Are you Jill's brother?" When I gave him the affirmative, he asked, "Can you drive?" I took a deep breath and said yes, and so he proceeded to write out a full licence to drive. I think he thought he'd get in the good books. It did worry me, as I didn't have a clue how to drive, which came back to bite me as I cranked my car within the preceding 24 hours. I often envied my three sisters, as they had a special bond which my mother assured me I was included, but this was not a credible assertion when Jill was standing behind Mum with her tongue fully extended outwards and her fingers stretching them out. In all sincerity, there was no doubt in my mind that Jill was a good sister who did not deserve the terrible afflictions put on her from the dreaded Parkinson's disease and to dementia, and I'm sure everyone who knew Jill acknowledged her incredible bravery throughout her decades of suffering, and yet still give a smile in appreciation of family and the many loyal friends who continually went out of their way to greet and comfort Jill during her ordeal, which we are all very grateful. From Sig and I, we salute our sister Jill, who can now rest in peace at long last. Thank you.
That was brilliant, Rod. Thank you very much. I'd now like to invite Brett to the lectern, please.
Well, we're of course gathered here today to remember Jill and to say farewell. It was Jill's wish to hold this celebration of life with her family and friends and work colleagues, and it's just so appropriate to be in this lovely Freya room at the CYC, and important because the golden thread of sailing runs through our when we met, when we married, and our subsequent life. The Jill and Brett story commences about 45 years ago in 1974 when I set out on the Regulation World Tour. There's a fair amount of fate involved in this, and you'll see that Jill and I were really meant to meet. We really were. Following travel through Italy and France, I found myself in Piraeus, Greece, with a sailing mate, Richard Spencer. Somehow we inveigled ourselves onto CYC Commodore Bill and Margaret Saltus's yacht Meltemi, which was going to race in the 1974 Ionian Rally out of Corinth. On board we met fellow Aussies Roger Grimes and Mike Thackeray, and as you will see, Mike is important to this story. Racing was abruptly cancelled due to Greece and Turkey declaring war on each other, and sadly we had to be content with sailing the Greek islands. It was pretty tough, someone had to do it. Then we flew off to Newport, Rhode Island to watch the America's Cup. Richard and I next met Mike in London, And it was here that he uttered those immortal words, "You must meet this girl, Jill Robey." How's that for fate? Really fate it was. So Jill rang me looking for tickets to the New Year's Eve ball at the London Corinthian Yacht Club, and it was said that she fell in love with my voice. I, of course, when I met her, fell head over heels in love with her. So we used to go down to Cowes every weekend, where I sailed on an English Admiral's Cup yacht, and we did the Fastnet race, and I came back to Sydney, and then Jill subsequently came back a few months later with a return ticket, I might add, but she decided to stay. And we got married, we bought a house at Greenwich, we did some extensions, we had a baby, Zoe. Where is she? Oh, there she is. No. And life was pretty good. Around 1985, I noticed a slight tremor in her little finger. She brought me a cup of coffee, and there was a little tremor in her little finger. And that was the start of her Parkinson's disease. It was finally diagnosed in Harley Street and later confirmed in Sydney. Jill carried on bravely for some 34 years, working in Sydney for Neville Rand, and then in Maroubra and Canberra with Laurie, until I think about 1997, when her condition worsened and she was unable to travel. In 2008, she underwent a procedure called deep brain stimulation, which gave her a wonderful new lease on life for a number of years. She regained expression in her face. She needed no medication and was able to run with little Ruby in the park. And she even stopped kicking people under the table. It's quite a plus. Sadly, however, her illness continued to progress, and the past 2.5 years in aged care were distressing for everyone who remembered the old Jill. But we knew that she felt safe and secure, was treated with great care and compassion, and in typical Jill fashion, rarely complained. She just never did. I think if there are two words to describe her, it would be tenacity and love. She never gave in to the disease, which she bore with great stoicism. She had a ready smile, a sardonic wit, an incisive intellect, always with great concern for others. She loved life, she loved helping people, loved Zoe, and she even loved me a little bit, which is quite amazing. But above all, she loved her many friends and colleagues who in return loved her, many of whom are here today to celebrate her wonderful life. I just want to do a few thank yous. I know I'm repeating myself, or repeating others, but just to Rod and Sig and their families, Zoe, Ruby and Max, Jan and Jenny, Jill's work colleagues and dear friends. Many of you have travelled from interstate, and I've got Darwin, Cairns, Adelaide, Gold Coast and Melbourne. And as mentioned, all of us in this room have in some way been touched by Jill, and it's a wonderful measure of the love and respect in which she was held. I also want to say thanks to the special people who supported our family and were able to visit Jill, not only at the house but also at Wesley Gardens. Really the support from everyone has been nothing short of amazing. Zoe, Jan and Jenny, Sig and Rod, Deslin, who took Jill to lunch and out for facials. Amazing, amazing effort. Jan Caspers, the staff at Wesley Gardens, Susan and Julia. Also like to make special mention of my shipmates Rob, Alan and Phil and Leo, and of course Mike and Helen who've supported me over the years. It goes without saying that special thanks are due to our MC Jenny. Where are you, Jen? Oh, there she is. A special mention to our friend Anna, who helped so much over the years. CYC General Manager Eddie Moore and caterer Kylie Catford and her staff. We've got a guest book which we'd like you all to sign, and later, as mentioned, a roving mic for anyone who would like to share reminiscences of Jill. In closing, Jenny's going to hand over to Zoe, who's going to talk about her mum, pardon me, and then the shed life of Jill's David Jones account, which Jill and Zoe made very good use of. And then I think David's going to talk about Jill's working life. So here's to Jill. She's going to...
Thanks, Dad. Where to begin for someone as extraordinary as Jill Hart? a woman of beauty, wisdom, and above all, a generosity of spirit that burns so bright within her. Everyone in this room and beyond was touched by it. If we think about our Jill, she was gorgeously funny, ferociously intelligent, steadfastly loyal, a truly dedicated friend and wife. But wasn't I the lucky one? I was her daughter. And what a mother she was. I presume at some memorials, some children have to put a positive spin on their lost parent, but not me. Jill was just the best. She was truly brilliant, selfless, kind, thoughtful, giving, never judging, and endlessly patient. She spoiled me absolutely rotten. She took me to almost every party, and there were a lot of them. And as Paul Keating once said, she gave me a love delivered so unconditionally that she sent me out into the world in an asbestos suit. When I was 6, Mum took long service leave and we travelled to London to stay with the darling Rochmans. We jetted to Italy, stayed in a room with a view in Florence, took the train up to Venice, went skiing in Switzerland, and we just had the best time together for 3 whole months. No school and endless fun. It didn't matter that when I returned I couldn't remember how to subtract. It was the trip of a lifetime for both of us. I'll never forget Mum, who always had an enviable figure in a natty pair of grey leather trousers, boots, red Ray-Bans, looking $1 million as we wandered through London in the late 80s. I was always enormously proud that she was my mother, and that has always stayed with me. I was proud of the amazing work she did, which she ardently loved. I was so proud of all her loving friends, and I was proud of the funny, clever, beautiful person that she was. Her time in palliative care was such a gift in a way. We listened to Roxy music, the Travelling Wilburys, Roy Orbison, and Mum's all-time favourites, the Stones. Mum had visits from her dear friends and family, and of course her beloved Sig. And thanks to all my darling friends and family who fed and supported me during this time. Whilst Mum was in hospital, I was able to sit with her and tell her how I couldn't have wished for a better mother, and to thank her for everything that she'd given me. I feel so privileged to have had the opportunity to say such important things. I know that we will all never forget Jilly's spectacular smile, the sparkle in her eyes, and the joy with which she approached life and friendship. Since we lost her, I've felt stronger than I've ever felt before. And one of her most important qualities was her absolute tenacity and strength, as Dad said. She approached adversity and her illnesses with such enormous courage and dignity, and I know that we're all in awe of the bravery that she showed. I think Jill is everything that is good about humanity in our world. And if we can all be a little bit more like Jilly, then I know for certain that the world will be a better place. I think most of you know that Mum was an atheist, but I do like to think of her with Helly and Jude somewhere enjoying a glass of wine. And I'll finish with some words from Leonard Cohen, which struck a chord with me whilst I was sitting with Mum in room 12 of Ward 4C. And you know that I've always loved you for your beauty and your wisdom, but I don't need to say anything more about that because you know all about that. But now I just want to wish you a very good journey. Goodbye, old friend. Endless love, and see you down the road.
Wow. You wouldn't be moved by such a heartfelt tribute, and that any mother would be very proud of, I'm sure. I'd now like to invite to the lectern, please, David Hill, a very long-term friend of Jill's. Thank you, David.
What a great photo. A picture paints 1,000 words. Jill was one of the most extraordinary person I think any of us ever met. She was loving, caring, kind, and fun-loving. And I think we've got to celebrate the fact that despite the Parkinson's disease, she lived a great life. It was well lived. I first met Jill, not in Australia, but in England, the year after Brett met her. I had a houseboat below Windsor Castle on the Thames, and my twin brother worked with Jill in New South Wales Government House, and I remember him bringing Jill and all of the crowd out for these unbelievably big parties on my croquet lawn. That was the taste of many things to come with Jill and her love of fun and love of partying. It was the following year, 1976, that we began working together in Neville Wran's office. When Neville Wran was elected Premier, he asked me to set up an independent economic and financial advisory team, independent of the public service. And Jill was the first person I hired into what became known as the Ministerial Advisory Unit. And it's terrific, incidentally, to see that Mau Mau staff and Neville Wran staff are all here today. That's over 40 years ago. And it's a measure of the affection that people hold Jill. How she was the first person I hired was interesting. I was appointed to this position, but they gave me no office space. And the first day I was wandering around aimlessly around the state office block. And I came into this office and everybody was at lunch except Jill, who was holding the fort. And she said, "Do you remember me? I worked with your brother in London." And I explained to her my problem. And she said, "Take this office space." And when the boss came back afterwards, I was sitting in his chair in his big office. And Jill said, "Oh, the Premier said that they've got to take this office space." So I rewarded her by appointing her office manager. It had belonged to an outfit called the Media Monitoring Outfit. She said that your needs are greater than theirs. And so we worked together for some years, and it became known as the Mau Mau, Ministerial Advisory Unit. They tried to give us an innocuous title, but of course the Mau Mau was a terror organisation in Kenya. And Jill, I was talking to Nigel Stokes, who's here today. Nigel was in the Mau Mau for all those years as well. And Milton Cockburn, and some really good people, old Tom Fitzgerald, and they all said the same thing about Jill. It was a very combative environment. We were in very aggressive negotiations with Treasury and all the other government departments because we were independent from them. And Jill was an immensely calming influence. So much so, I remember on one occasion the head of Treasury phoned Jill because he found she was easier to get along with than the rest of us. The Mau Mau, it was when we were in the Mau Mau, she married the wonderful Brett, who has been an absolute Trojan through this whole story. And a couple of years later was pregnant with Zoe. And we in the Premier's Department and the Mau Mau felt some sense of ownership of this pregnancy because Jill worked right through to just delivering. In fact, I can remember the day Zoe was born because I worked late and I turned up at the hospital to visit Jan and the new baby, and it was very late and I'd been drinking. And it was in the days they were very strict about hospital visits, and I was a couple of hours after closing time and they wouldn't let me in until I told them that I was the father.
True story.
Now, I think this led to considerable sympathy to Brett. But God only knows what they must have thought of Jill.
Can I send you the Skeggs bills for
Not only did we work well together, there was a blending of our respective social groups, and I was amazed. We all had close friends. Jill had about 200, and we enjoyed the most fabulous parties together. And one of the mutual introductions was we introduced one of our mates, Helen McFadden, to Jill Hart, and it became an absolutely fabulous friendship until Helen died a couple of years ago. And Jill got to Queensland for the funeral. It was really very touching. And Helen McFadden, who had the nickname Mrs. Doubtfire, for those that, and her photo will be up here in a minute and you'll recognise her. Helen McFadden blamed me for the nickname, but it wasn't me. I thought it was a terrific nickname. And I blamed Jill. But Jill denied it too, which means if it wasn't Jill then it wasn't me. It's probably somebody in this room. So I think it was Joe. But the social outcome was huge parties. After about 5 years in the Mau Mau, I had to leave because I got a new job running the railways. And largely at the instigation of Mrs. Doubtfire and Jill, we had some of the world's most famous and biggest parties ever. And I think half the people here would have been at some of these. The Great Railway Ball at the Central Railway on a Saturday night, we had to get rid of all these passengers. And we took over the whole concourse and had a fantastic party with 2 bands, brass bands of course, for 1,000 people. Now, the balls were ostensibly for railway people, but we had to reserve 200 tickets for Jill and Mrs. Doubtfire's closest friends. And I think I recognised quite a few people who came to those balls. The other thing we did, and I was joking earlier, that if you were the boss of the railways today and tried to do this, you'd probably go to jail. We put together those old country sleeper trains, and for long weekends we'd invite 200 close friends, which was just enough sleeping accommodation for Helen and Jill's closest friends, and we'd go to a picnic races somewhere, like Golgong or Byron Bay, or we went once to Bourke. In fact, Jill had the most eclectic group of friends you could possibly imagine. I remember we were going to Bourke and one of her friends, who's photographed here with a bridal hat on, John Sidaway, nicknamed L. Sid, who for some strange reason lived in West Wyalong a lot of the time. But he came down, he couldn't come away with us to Bourke, and for some reason I had too many commitments. So we left Central, and the next morning at Byrock in Western New South Wales over breakfast, there was Sidaway. He'd got on the train and forgot, and I had to lend him a shirt and a clean pair of underpants. Jill was an exceptional woman. She's one of the nicest people I ever met. Do you know, I never heard anyone say a bad word about her, and I never met anybody that disliked her, and I never heard her complain. To Brett and to Zoe, this is of course a terrible time. It's a great loss, because you were so lucky, as Zoe said, to have such a wonderful person as a wife and a mother. But I want you to know, and most of us are aware of this, she was blessed to have you. In the hospital, the vigil that you established, she was lucky and blessed to have you. And in fact, I think it's a good note to finish by acknowledging all of us are that much richer and that much better off for having shared such a big part of our lives with such a wonderful person as Jill. Thank you.
Yeah.
While the friends come to join me again. I just quickly want to share a text message from a very close family friend, or close friend of Jill's, from Bernie, who couldn't be here today, and she sent this to Brett. My dear friend Jill, a great listener.
My task, and it's a very pleasant task, to move a toast to Jilly in the celebration of a great life. But before I do, I want to just have a few words about my association with her. One of the great pieces of good fortune that, amongst others, came my way. I went to the State Parliament in February of 1970, and we won office in 1976 when NK ran in a very close-run affair, got us over the line. And David has spoken about those early years. I got to know Jilly about the same time because she was Neville's appointment secretary, and he was Premier and Minister for Ethnic Affairs, amongst other things, and I was a backbencher. And her job was to make sure that the government was represented at everything, as you can imagine, and Ethnic Affairs got many hundreds of invitations to a mixed bag of events, and it was Jill's job to palm them out, or more correctly, to talk people into going to all sorts of places. The first occasion that I fell for her charm, and she'd always say, "We'll send a car, we'll send a car." So it was a big deal. Was a celebration of the Armenian genocide. Said celebration, commemoration was held in the Paddington Town Hall. There were about 780 Armenians there, and there was a lot of Arak drunk, and they were screaming, "Death to Turkey, death to the Turks." It was one of those sort of nights. Shortly thereafter, within months, she'd sent me to the Bangladeshi National Day celebration. And it was 4 hours, it was in July. It was a very cold, bleak July that year. And the vegetarian food wasn't too bad, but it was pretty cold. There wasn't a drink to be had, and there were 4 hours of Bangladeshi dancing, traditional dancing. I'm not sure what the third one was, but it was equally horrific. So I knew I was a backbencher first off. But years later, after I'd eventually worked my way into a ministry, and Neville Rand had stood down in the mid-80s, Julie joined me, and we had the time of our lives. She was the cement in the office, and she was, as people have spoken about, the love everyone had for Julie. Julie was the most loved person in the political system I've ever come across. I mean, the staff loved her. The drivers were particularly attached to her. I loved her. My boys loved her. I mean, I had 2 sons, I think one on either side of you, Zoe. They remember her because Julie, they knew, could do anything. I mean, if you wanted tickets, no point in asking your dad. No way. But Julie could fix just about anything, so it didn't matter what the concert. They went direct to Julie. Whether it be Red Hot Chili Peppers or Billy Joel or U2 or any number of other concerts, Julie sorted them, and they have great love, always have for Julie and this family. So Canberra was, there are a couple of funny stories I'll tell you about Canberra. The first is that Julie did everything as if she wasn't at all impaired with Parkinson's, including serving morning tea, afternoon tea, and